Hello everyone, my name is Lowko and welcome to another StarCraft 2 video. In this video I'm going to be discussing the macro changes that they have recently made to the StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void expansion, now that I've actually been able to play it. They announced these changes quite some time ago, or at least, that they were planning on giving this a try, and I purposefully did not actually discuss it earlier because I first wanted to play it before giving you my impressions. And to be honest, my initial impressions were probably like most of you guys, where they weren't very positive at all. So in this video, I'm going to be introducing what this is all about. I'm going to be talking about advantages, disadvantages, and something that I would still like to see tested as well at the end of this video. So a couple of days ago, they have introduced some massive changes to Legacy of the Void. First off, Queen injects now actually only generate 2 larvae instead of 4, and on top of that, queens automatically inject. Chrono Boost has been removed and mules are gone. These are changes right here that fundamentally change the way StarCraft 2 is played, and it makes it a completely different game. Well, we still have the normal units and we still got what we always had, but this is going to be changing the core of the game. Now, everything I'm going to be talking about right here is going to be completely from a gameplay point of view. I'm not going to be talking about balance because as it is right now, Terran is extremely weak, but balance is completely irrelevant at this point. I do have a couple of concerns considering it, but we'll go over that. But everything I'm going to be talking about is going to be from a game design and a gameplay point of view. So you may be wondering why Blizzard has decided to at the very least give this a try. A couple of weeks ago, Blizzard did fly me out over to California to their headquarters, and this is one of the subjects that we discussed significantly. It was actually clear that most of the Korean professional gamers that were over there were the ones complaining that the game was getting too difficult and that Legacy of the Void was gonna have a skill ceiling that was much higher than Heart of the Swarm and would therefore be nearly impossible to master. And interestingly enough, it was actually the Koreans complaining about that, whereas in the past we have always heard that StarCraft 2 was too easy compared to Brood War and that there was too little to do and all those kind of things, but the Koreans already thought that the game was going to be too difficult in its current state in the beta, which was before these macro changes got introduced. So what do they mean with that? For the most part, in Legacy of the Void, all of the units that you have in the game, well, not all of them, but pretty much all of them, have some sort of ability that you can be using. Corruptors got a new ability, we have Disruptors being added in the game, we got Lurkers, and all these kind of things that they have added to the game, and the new units that they have introduced into the game, make it so that you have to focus a lot more on controlling your army, and make it so that you have to make sure that you're constantly babysitting those kind of units. I mean, if you're not paying attention to your Lurkers, they are gonna go down. You need a separate control group, you need to be on top of them at all times, because if you're not, you're gonna be losing them most likely, at which point you basically lose the game. So basically, Legacy of the Void is making the game more difficult, and instead of trying to bump down the amount of abilities that you have to be working with, Blizzard has instead decided to change up the core mechanics of the game in the fact that now, like I mentioned, Chrono Boost is gone, mules are gone, and Queen injects are automatic. Now, when I heard these changes initially, I was kind of laughing at it as well. I was like, alright, they're making the game easier, I'm gonna be dropping my APM from like 250 to about 100, because there's gonna be so much less to do. But honestly, now that I've actually been playing it, I've noticed very quickly that I actually kind of enjoy the fact that I don't have to worry about it anymore and that I can think a lot more about strategy instead, and the fact that I don't have to, constantly go back to my bases, but instead am allowed to expand over the map, scout more aggressively, focus a lot more on multi-pronged aggression and all these kind of things. Now, I think the reason why we see a lot of pro gamers complain about the fact that they are changing these macro mechanics is for the very fact that they are going to be nerfed themselves. I mean, I also sort of take pride in the fact that my mechanics are the thing that are carrying me to like top 300-400-ish in Europe right now. The fact that Queen injects are removed basically means that I got a direct nerf to me. And I think that's the reason why a lot of the pro gamers are not enjoying these changes whatsoever, because hey, for the most part, they don't like change as it is right now, which is fair enough. If you make a living out of this, it is very difficult to, go around with change and see these massive core mechanics change in the game, but it's also simply because it is something they've been practicing for a very long amount of time, and that will just straight up be removed. So first off, what are the advantages of actually introducing those changes? Well, the most obvious one is that the game is easier at its very core. You don't have to worry as much as you do right now in Heart of the Swarm later on into the game, and that will actually make the game more accessible for new players. If you pick up Heart of the Swarm right now, I'm gonna have to burst your bubble for the most part because you're likely gonna be stuck in bronze for months, because it's just a very, very difficult game to just pick up and start playing. At the professional level, when you watch any of the pro games, you usually don't see any of the commentators talk about, queen injects or dropping down the mules or hitting the perfect chrono boost. But those are mechanics that are happening across the board very, very well, and it's not really a fun aspect to watch. So first off, it will make the game a little bit more accessible for new players, and it's easier to pick it up if you first start playing StarCraft. Second, the game is going to be more exciting to watch for spectators because you don't have to be looking at your bases as a player as much anymore, which means that the engagement and the multi-pronged aggression and the amount of control groups that you will be using for your army are going up. I would not be surprised if we see like 5 or 6 control groups to control an army just to try to get that perfect engagement down. And for a spectator, it's going to be much more exciting to watch as the players don't have to go back to their main bases nearly as often. Also, because there's going to be a lot more focus on micro as well as, general engagement, strategy will become a lot more interesting as well. Next, we also see that economy climbs up a lot more smoothly. Whereas in the past you would, for example, sometimes see a Terran player save up economy or energy on the command centers for quite some time and then drop down a ton of mules at a new base, you would see a massive spike in economy, and the same goes for chrono boost and the amount of drones you can make. But now that larva is gone, or at least, has been reduced, and we also don't see chrono boost and mules anymore, there is a massive change in those economy spikes, and it basically makes the game flow a lot more smoothly, which makes it feel, honestly, a lot more like Brood War did. Now, even though economy flows a lot more smoothly in Legacy of the Void after these macro mechanics changes, there is also the fact that Terran and Protoss especially will have a much harder time coming back in games. And that is one of the concerns that I'm having as well. Let's say a bunch of mutas swoop into your main mineral line and you lose like 20 probes. Are you really going to be able to come back to that if you don't have, the same goes for SCVs obviously, but if you don't have chrono boost and mules, is there any way you can really gain back that advantage if the Zerg player doesn't mess up? I mean, as it is right now, in Heart of the Swarm for example, it is already very difficult to come back for that, from that point. But in Legacy of the Void, is that going to be possible at all? Comebacks are going to be a lot more difficult. On top of that, Protoss feels honestly a lot less gimmicky. Since you can't really be going for any kind of quote-unquote cheap strategies anymore, and since you can't be chrono boosting out that warp gate incredibly fast, and since you can't be getting, your Dark Templar at the 6-minute mark, well, with the new clock you still can, but you get the point. You can't be rushing them out anymore. Protoss is now also forced to be going for either, a very aggressive timing attack, or to just play straight up macro and expand all over the map. And it's gonna be a lot less cheesy 2-base all-ins. That's obviously not to say that there's not going to be any 2-base all-ins anymore, but there's not going to be like 6 different Stargate timings that you have to worry about, but there's likely just going to be one for Oracles, one for Phoenixes, and one for Void Race, and maybe some carrier stuff in there as well, but you get what I mean. On top of that, now that mules are gone, scans all of a sudden are becoming a lot more viable, because effectively speaking, they are now the same cost of a supply drop, which basically means that a scan has gone down from its cost for about 300 minerals, which is what a mule is, like 250, 300 minerals, to about 100 minerals instead. So scans become a lot more available and a lot more accessible. And on top of that, I guess this is one of the main concerns that a lot of people had. There is still plenty of stuff to do. I mainly play Zerg myself, but I've noticed now that my queen injects are automatic, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not controlling my queens anymore. They still have to be practically hugging the hatchery, but it's just something that you don't have to worry about nearly as much. Skill instead for Zerg, for example, is now going to be a lot more determined about the amount of creep spread that you can do, and you all of a sudden have APM left over for example, dropping around the base. Now let's talk about a couple of concerns that I personally have. First off, we have Terran Bio. As it is right now in Heart of the Swarm, the only reason why Bio is popular is the fact that it needs so many minerals, and you will actually be able to get those minerals from simply dropping down mules, and because of that constant flow in economy that you get and those constant spikes, you can actually afford to get a lot of barracks and start pumping out those marines and do these never-ending timing attacks, where you basically just rally everything across the map and go from there. Now the fact that you won't be able to get as many minerals as quickly as Terran basically makes it so that mech is all of a sudden very common. And I understand this is mostly just a numbers game, however I'm sort of wondering at what kind of number they would have to tweak in order to make that better. Do we really want to see Marines with more HP, or do we really want to see a reduced build time on Marines and then a reduced cost as well, or something like that? Do we really want to buff to SCVs? I'm not completely sure, and that is one of the concerns that I personally have a lot, because the only thing I've been facing personally is mech, and talking to a couple of different pro gamers, they have also basically decided that Marine, bio timing attacks are practically impossible. And I'm not really sure what number would have to be changed in order to switch that up. Second, for Protoss, I am kind of concerned about the fact that you can't be tech switching nearly as easily anymore. We already see most of the time, once a Protoss player commits to, let's say, robotics facilities, that they will stay on robotics facilities for a very, very long amount of time. And sometimes later on in the game, for example, you see a switch back to Stargate. Now, as it is right now in Legacy of the Void, with Chrono Boost removed, switching around to another tech is kind of really very difficult. I mean, do you really want to go up to carriers after you go for robotics? Because you know for a fact that it's going to take forever to try and get those units out without Chrono Boost. So tech switching for Protoss is going to be significantly more difficult. My next concern has to do mostly with death balls, because a lot of people have initially said that this would basically reduce the amount of death balls that we would see, but in my experience so far, this is the exact opposite. I've been noticing a lot of Terran players and Protoss players sitting back for the most part, trying to get up to that big army off of 3 bases and just playing very turtly up to that point, because they basically only have income for 1 army. I mean, once you lose that army, it is game over, but getting the early game economy, and lacking that early game economy rather, is much more difficult. Once they get past like the 3-4 minute mark, they will be able to start squeezing out a lot more workers, but as it is right now, it seems to me at the very least that turtly play is very, very popular. And that is partly due to the fact that mechanics have been changed, partly due to the fact that map layouts are not very suitable for the current playstyle and the current way that the game is being approached. But still, it is still a concern for me that, you know, death balls are completely viable still, and it's very difficult to play against. And honestly, I don't like seeing death balls whatsoever. I mean, the obvious intention right here is to make sure that players are starting to move out with smaller armies as well and dropping at 16 different places and having ton of multi-pronged aggression. But as it is right now, that perceived goal is not really there. And the biggest concern that I have is the fact that they've pointed out that there's only going to be 1 more month of, you know, basically trying out big changes. And afterwards, we will only be seeing small incremental number changes instead to watch the release of Legacy of the Void. And I think that is mostly because they want to be running WCS 2016, you know, obviously in Legacy of the Void, and obviously a release date around Christmas time is very useful as well, financially speaking. So I am a little bit concerned if that is enough time to only have 1 more month, because there's a bunch of stuff that I would really like to see as well. First off, what I would really like to see, there has been a ton of suggestions everywhere, on Team Liquid, on Reddit, everywhere, talking about economy changes, and I would really like to see at least some of it being tested. As it is right now, it is, you know, pretty interesting, and it is definitely an improvement to what there was in Heart of the Swarm, but I still feel like it's worth at least trying out. The same obviously goes for these macro changes. It's worth at least trying out, and if it doesn't work out, great, revert it, but at least give it a try. Secondly, what I would really like to see is a complete overhaul to the Mothership Core and the Gateway units. I mean, I know that right now in Heart of the Swarm, the Mothership Core is completely necessary in order to make mass recall, you know, and actually get your units back, and also photon overcharge to hold any kind of, you know, early game aggression. But for the most part, it's honestly just a band-aid. The unit shouldn't have been there in the first place, and a straight up buff to most of the Gateway units would make this a lot better and a lot more interesting. And honestly, I would most of the time rather see the Mothership Core either being removed or be like a pure specialist spellcaster type unit, but not something that you can put on a Nexus to basically be invulnerable for 45 seconds. I mean, that's just no fun. A massive overhaul to that would be much appreciated, or at least give it a try. Next up, what I would really like to see is some more interesting map design layouts. And with interesting, I don't mean in-base expansions and trying out to, you know, basically get back to a max out army. What I'm talking about is something that forces players out on the map. Maybe make expansions more spaced out. And this may be a little bit of Zerg bias right here, and I'm not afraid to admit that. But I would love to see, you know, smaller armies move out across the map that will basically be, you know, interesting throughout the entirety of the game. As it is right now, with these in-base expansions and these third bases that are very accessible and very easy to take, there's just a lot of turtling and it's just no fun, and I would love to see some messing around with that as well before the game gets released. And lastly, something that I've been thinking about mostly over the last couple of days is maybe just make Queens a purely early game defensive unit and just, you know, take out Queen and Jacks altogether. I mean, the fact that they're automatic is pretty interesting, but honestly, what is the difference between a hatchery just simply generating more larvae and having a Queen purely as an early game defense unit, and maybe, you know, some late game shenanigans when you want to be marching across the map with some transfuse? But honestly, automatic Queen and Jacks, that's not really fun. I would rather just simply see a hatchery generate more larvae. So long story short, in the past, Blizzard has always sort of been a gaming company that produces amazing games, but has always been a little stubborn. And I'm very, very, very glad that they're actually trying out this sort of stuff. And honestly, while I was initially pretty negative about it myself, My initial impressions weren't that great. Now that I've actually been playing it, I've been having a total blast. And while the game definitely is not balanced whatsoever as it is right now, I am so happy that this is actually being tried out. Even if it doesn't make it to the final release of the game, at least we now know what it's like. I just hope there is still enough time to make the game as awesome as it can be. One thing I would really like to say though is that for the most part, ever since these changes got announced, I've seen a ton of negativity on the forums, on Reddit, on Team Liquid, on everything, and it's just not really fun. It would be really awesome if, you know, at least some of you would be a little more open-minded to change, just to see what it brings to the game, even if it doesn't make it to the final release, because hey, this is turning out to be pretty good so far. And other than that, if you have any questions regarding any of the changes or you want to hear my thoughts on anything else, make sure you post it right below the like button in the comment section of this video. And also, if you're interested in more content, hit that subscribe button. It is basically somewhere around here, I think, maybe. But click it, you'll get a notification when I upload more content. I want to thank you guys all for watching. Have an amazing day, do not forget to smile, and I'll see you in the next one.